Services. Thank you to all of you for supporting this event. We're here to see a live Narcan training with two of our amazing staff at ACR Health. We have Ben Prespioria, who is the Substance Service Coordinator, and also William Nelson, who is a dedicated volunteer who has given us an entire year to work with us and our clients. He's a community advocate with our agency in the volunteer department. So guys, thank you so much for being here. Welcome, good evening. How are you?
I'd say we're doing pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It was nice and sunny out today. And, you know, I'm just excited to be talking about something that's very important to us. And we hope that everyone on the call can take away something useful.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk opioid crisis, as well as specifically Narcan training. Narcan can literally save a life. And I'm just going to turn it over to you guys so you can take us through what we need to know.
Appreciate you, Allison. So, you know, for those who know William and don't know me, I'm Ben. We're going to kind of walk you through harm reduction a little bit as kind of this big, broad umbrella topic that you know, Narcan training really falls under. And Narcan training is so important, you know, in kind of the fields we work with. And kind of my background has been in the substance field for about 4 years. I began as an HIV tester in the rehab facilities in Onondaga County, which is where Syracuse is. And, you know, it was there where I really learned of how prevalent this is in our community. And, you know, there's been a lot of factors that have really, you know, kind of allowed it to increase. And so what I'll start with first, and why, you know, Narcan training, you know, is so important and should be talked about, you know, is because, you know, opioid overdose deaths, you know, it's not just in New York State. It's really kind of everywhere. But obviously we'll focus on this because it's where we are. And so if you can see on that graph and what we have, you know, over the past 20+ years or so, you know, it started, you know, fairly low as for opioid overdose deaths. And there's a big reason for that. If you can see kind of that gold bar, okay, that's the only one I'm really going to talk about here. So is that gold bar represents the trend of synthetic opioids that are prevalent in the communities around here, you know, whether it's in the urban communities or in the rural communities, it's everywhere. New York State is this big, wide open space with lots of towns in between the cities. And so there's a lot of ground to cover when it comes to this, okay? We really started to see synthetic opioid overdose deaths, you know, really kind of rise in about 2014, 2015. And there's a lot of factors that we'll take you through throughout this presentation, but really we'll just focus on the number for this. You know, it reached, you know, over 2,000 deaths statewide beginning in 2016. And that was a really, really high number. We hit our peak, I believe, in 2017 and 18. And so then as a community, we kind of we responded to it, you know, by introducing Narcan and getting people trained on Narcan and how to reverse overdoses, you know, that people may be in the event for, in the area for, and it's been so important. So part of my job here is to order and distribute Narcan, you know, to anybody who needs it, really. And William can tell you that, you know, we order quite a bit. And in fact, if I'm not here, usually he's the one that's stuck with kind of putting it away for me, and I appreciate him for that. But you know, we were just putting some together. We put over 300 kits together this week alone, and we have another order on the way. So that's how much we're ordering and distributing. But like that gold bar represents that really steep rise of opioid overdose deaths in New York State. That's including New York City. And so, you know, as we see that kind of go up, it's a number we want to bring down. And, you know, hopefully, you know, you know, as 2020 kind of progressed in terms of COVID and everything, we saw our most deaths, you know, in New York State, and in the county, you know, since 2018, 2017. And that's a really kind of a scary thing for us. So we'll pass along. I'll move along to William and he will take it from here.
Yeah. And so I'm sorry, can I pause you 1 second? There is a question that I think would be helpful to know as we get started. Does synthetic mean fentanyl, or are there more synthetic versions?
Synthetic can include fentanyl, but when we're talking about synthetic fentanyl, we're talking about fentanyl that's been kind of produced in labs and kind of has additives to it. So it's not really, so fentanyl has medical uses, okay? So there's a, you know, it's used in hospitals and it's used in people with chronic conditions and overwhelming situations in those kind of like controlled settings. Synthetic opioids being the stuff that's produced, has stuff added to it all the time, and which makes it much more dangerous. And as we go through this, I'm not sure what number slide it is, but there's a slide where I will go a little more into it and why that could be harmful to anybody who uses it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Allison. And just for folks to know, we can't see questions popping up. So if you feel that you have a really important question, please feel free to ask it. And then we're also going to save some time at the end too, because we know this can be like a very complicated, complex topic.
Yep.
And again, it's really helpful to engage and just ask those questions. So I'm going to start a little bit with my background. So like Allison said, I'm a Jesuit volunteer, so I'm here for 1 year. And it's been a really great opportunity for me to learn and to really kind of experience what it's like to work in a community clinic. And by far, my favorite experiences is working with people as they enter the clinic. So whether that be the syringe exchange or the health clinic, which we'll talk about in a couple slides, just getting to know these individuals and building a relationship and kind of hearing more about their story and their life has something that's been really impactful to me. And it's really kind of helped shape how I want to go and practice and be in my career as I go. And what I really like about ACR Health is the model in which ACR Health operates, and that is the harm reduction model. And what that is meaning and kind of saying is we know that in life there are risks, and a lot of time it's not practical or feasible to entirely cut those risks out. One example we talk about a lot is driving in a car. For many of us, we need to drive in cars to see our family, our friends, to get food from the grocery store. However, there is this kind of risk to getting an accident or having a crash. But that doesn't necessarily mean we should never drive cars. We just need to find ways to make driving cars safer. And so the harm reduction model would dictate, like, we wear seatbelts, so that way in case we do get an accident, it's not as bad. We also came up with traffic laws. So we stop at stop signs. We can only go a certain speed. This is not to get rid of all risk. This is just to make the activity safer for everyone. And so we take the same harm reduction model and we apply it to a lot of the community illnesses and such. So where this comes into substance use is the acknowledgement that not everyone is ready or will ever be ready for treatment, and especially an abstinence-based only treatment. Folks have very complicated lives. They have needs, they have wants, and sometimes that does not necessarily align with being abstinence and staying away from all substances. So we have to realize that as a community and find strategies and alternatives to make sure that individuals can keep themselves healthy. This is a big theory about promoting individuals' autonomy and ability to make the most informed, rational, best choices. So we're not here to tell everyone, like, this is how you have to live your life. You have to be this many days sober before you can see us. You had to have this level of health insurance. No, that's not what we do. We're here, again, to establish connection with individuals. We're here to work with them to get every kind of level of benefit. We're going to celebrate every success, whether it's maybe you're not drinking 7 days a week, now you're drinking 5. That's a step in the right direction. We want to encourage that and keep have this be a positive experience, working towards something better. And it's also understanding that people who are in substance, they have a lot to contribute to us. They know what works for them. And so we're here to work with them. And again, find the best solution for them in the community and all that.
William, can I ask you a quick question?
Go ahead.
I'm just going to be that person who butts into your, your perfect presentation. But so if someone wants to stop doing a behavior, we support them through that decision as well, correct?
100%.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just not a requirement for folks to participate in our agency to abstain, but wherever they are, we will be there to help them take the next step that they want to take.
Right. And I think that's a big misconception for harm reduction, because from a harm reduction point of view, the best way to reduce harms is to not do that activity. Like if the sole thing you're worried about is getting in a car accident, the best way to not get in a car accident is to don't drive. Right. And if you're worried about overdosing, the best way to not overdose is to not use. And we respect people's decisions to do that. We again encourage folks to make the best rational decision, because we're here to provide education, resources, and to connect people to the services they need. Again, we don't want to.
Right. I'm sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, essentially, we're trying to keep people alive because that's the most important thing that we can do for another human being.
Right.
So we're here to help, not judge. And these are all of the different services that we provide depending on where you are and what you need.
Right. It's a great way to put it. And as this slide says too, like, we're not going to sit here and pretend that substance use does not have major impacts on individuals in the community, because it does. And we're not here to say that people have free reign to do substances and to do a lot of stuff associated with substances. Again, not what we're here to do. Again, not here to enable or condone or promote drug use. We're just saying that it happens. People make their choices. I come from a family of very strong-willed individuals. If someone tells me what to do, I am not going to do it. It has to be, I have to come to that conclusion on my own. I have to want to do something before I do it. If people just keep telling me to do something, I'm going to shut them out and I'm going to do whatever I continue to do. So when we're not trying to push people away, which is what can commonly happen by, again, establishing these barriers of certain days absences, certain health insurance, we're here to break those down, serve people, meet people where they're at, and provide services. So in a nutshell, that's what ACR tries to do. And ACR does it in a whole bunch of ways too. So while we're here to talk about Narcan, there's a whole bunch of other services that ACR provides that participants and clients may benefit from. So on the screen, this is a picture of our lovely Drug User Health Hub. It's staffed by a couple of incredible nurse practitioners, social workers. You will casually find me back there. It's a great place to be. And on the screen is a list of other services that can, again, help reduce harms. Again, we can help treat cuts, possible infections, all that. We can counsel people after an overdose, before an overdose, to let them know safe ways to use. We can provide PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylactic. That's a medication that helps HIV negative people stay HIV negative. We also do HIV, syphilis, and hepatitis C rapid testing. So people can come to us and 30 minutes later walk out knowing if they're HIV positive, HIV negative, all those tests. We can have people get started on treatment that day, as well as provide some other basic health services. And again, we're just trying, not all these approaches are going to work for every individual. Some individual may just want to participate in the syringe exchange program where they can safely dispose of their syringes and that's it. But maybe a person who doesn't initially want it comes back to us for month after month and has developed a relationship with either Antonio, Matt, myself, Ben in the syringe exchange. And after kind of us pushing for a little bit, then maybe he decides to pick up the phone and say, okay, tell me more about medical assisted treatment. Can you tell me more about an abstinence-based approach, and we can connect people and get them there. So it's, again, it's keeping people involved and not throwing them to the sides.
Yep. You know, when you really develop that connection and that rapport and that trust, you know, that's really kind of the key for what we try and do. And so, you know, kind of like William said, like, we're not ignoring the real harms that are associated with those things. Because as we get into the meat of this, we're talking about those opioids, we're talking about fentanyl, we're talking about heroin, we're talking about morphine, methadone, codeine, Vicodin, Percocet, all those things. That list you see on your screen is including, but it's not limited to those things. And so part of, I'll touch on the synthetic ones in a second here. But, you know, anybody who takes opioids in any sort of way. So we know that, you know, people are prescribed OxyContin and prescribed Vicodin, you know, for any kind of, for any kind of pain issue. And a lot of times, in my experiences, like that's sometimes where it starts. I'll never forget when I was at a training. Oh man, this was pre-COVID. It feels like it was so long ago. We were doing in-person trainings. And so I remember, you know, there was a gentleman who said to me, and he said it in front of his coworkers and his colleagues, you know, they were a traveling bunch. So he said that, you know, basically he's like, I injured my back doing something and I started to take oxys. And so at some point, like when we start to take opioids, okay, eventually our body builds a tolerance to it. I'll touch on that a little bit later. It builds tolerance. So all of a sudden it might take, you know, 2 of those Vicodins or whatever it is in order to feel the same effect as 1. And that sometimes it progresses into 4. And continuing on and on and on with that, you know, I'll never forget. He says, you know, I couldn't get it prescribed from my doctor anymore. He wouldn't give me any more of those OxyContins. And so I was talking to a friend about it, and he said, why don't you just, he goes, dude, he's like, why don't you just buy it off the street? He goes, and then once they found that, you know, using heroin, whether it's through injection, you know, popping a pill, sniffing, smoking, however you want to ingest it, he found that it was cheaper and it was easier to get. And so at that point, you know, it became, he found himself using more and more. And at that point, it had progressed so much to where, you know, they're using these substances on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And that is where, you know, the increased use can really ramp up the risk of overdose. So what an overdose is it's induced respiratory depression. So when we take opioids, no matter how, like I said, no matter how it's ingested, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter if we shoot it, smoke it, pop it, whatever it could be, we have these receptors in our brain that those opioids fill up, and they sit on them and they kind of take them over. Okay, so the way I kind of think of it is that it takes over, hijacks the brain, and that brain slows the body's breathing process down, and it essentially suffocates, you know, our brain of air. And we know that it takes about 5 minutes, okay, for, you know, the brain to start suffering damage when it goes without air to it, okay? So whenever that usage starts to happen, the overdose can occur either immediately or up to 5 hours after ingestion. Typically with fentanyl-based overdoses, typically they happen a lot faster. Okay, they can be very, very quick. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily need to be in 30 seconds. It doesn't necessarily, it can be in 5 minutes, but it's much quicker than it might be in any other way. And so we're talking about synthetic opioids. We're talking about street fentanyl, that man-made stuff, stronger than stuff prescribed by a medical provider, 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine or heroin. And here's the kicker with this. So let's actually go to the image real quick with that fentanyl vial in the middle. Okay, that can be a potentially lethal dose for someone who, you know, doesn't experience, you know, it might even be less than that. Someone who doesn't use regularly. If fentanyl's mixed into any kind of product we have, whether it's someone who's using cocaine, whether they're using methamphetamine, if fentanyl's mixed into that product and that individual doesn't regularly use opioids, they can be placed at really, really high risk of overdose and really, really fast. So that fentanyl is sold as a powder. It's mixed or substituted with other street drugs, heroin. Heroin's most common, but we're finding it's mixed in with cocaine too, and it's starting to become like it. You know, when I was screening people, it was common back then, back in 2017, 2018. It's even more common now. Fentanyl is very easy to find. Or it can be pressed into pills that mimic less potent drugs. Okay, so if someone turns to the street for Xanax, okay, or they're using a less, not a pain pill or anything like that, like a Xanax, whatever it might be, there's fentanyl in that product. Whatever that person's getting cannot necessarily be what they think it is, and that can be very, very dangerous. The carfentanil on the right there is something that we don't typically see, but is much more lethal than fentanyl even, but that's not common to see on the streets. And a lot of times I used to hear people call it, animal tranquilizers for large mammals, and, that mixed with humans, obviously not good. But so for someone who's engaging in just regular heroin use, it takes a little more than that for that to overdose, but obviously people have to know how much they're using and how they're doing it. And part of the way that we can find out that fentanyl test, there's fentanyl test strips that can, give us feedback on the substance that people might be using to determine whether or not there's fentanyl in it. The one disclaimer is that, some negative tests don't guarantee there's no fentanyl in the substance, but for a lot of times in the feedback we've gotten it says that these things work. Okay, it's a lot of times when people use fentanyl test strips, and they can determine whether or not there's fentanyl in their product. A lot of times, and much more than I thought would happen, people have decided to alter their use. They've used less, or they haven't used at all. And I think that's a really cool part of it. And it's also a form of harm reduction. So more on the use, I'll pass that over.
Yeah, I mean, fentanyl test strips are something really revolutionary because, again, this is another great example of harm reduction in use. Because a lot of the time if you went through all the trouble to go out, buy the drugs, get it, you're going to do it. But again, you can do the fentanyl test strips to make sure that you know what you're doing. Because if you look back at that previous slides, the grains of fentanyl or carfentanil in there, it's minimal, and you can't see that with the eye. And so the only way you can do that is you have to test chemically, and that's what these test strips can do. And so an individual, if they were interested in doing this, they would just even use the residue in the bag. Yep. So even if the substances they weren't necessarily planning on using, right, you would get that wet and then go ahead and put your test strips in. And if it's only one line appears, it's fentanyl. 2 lines, most likely not fentanyl. And again, that allows people the autonomy, the acknowledge to do what they do.
Would somebody get those test strips from us?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
anybody can show up, and then we would be able to provide those. Great.
Yep. So again, just walk up to the Swim Exchange. Just let us know what you're interested. Free of charge, no questions asked. Yep. If you want education, you can have it. If not, we give them a piece of paper that says how it works, and they can go from there. Yep. But again, this is something I think that's worth stressing too, is because if you were to ask my friends or my demographics of friends, do you do opioids? And they would just say, no, we don't do opioids. But in reality, no one has any idea, because you can't see it as an opioid, you can't smell it. When you mix opioids, it doesn't turn a certain color. And so this is a really good way just to let folks know what they're doing, and again, give them the autonomy, the choice to make what choice they're going to do, but hopefully to make the rational in that whatever circumstance it is. So to kind of continue talking about fentanyl, fentanyl I think is something that's been talked about a lot in the media, and there's kind of these myths about fentanyl and all that. I really just want to touch upon the last one just because we are at a Narcan training. And the myth is that Narcan does not work on fentanyl. And the reality is that is not true. What Narcan or naloxone is, it's a medication that removes the opiate from the opiate receptor, causing the overdose to subside. So basically allows you to start breathing again. And as Ben touched on earlier, it does not matter what type of opioid. If you take enough opioid to block up all the receptors, you're going to go into this respiratory depression. And so fentanyl just has a lot of these opiates in there. And that way it makes it more common for individuals to overdose. And Narcan will 100% work as long as you have enough Narcan to remove it from the receptors. All right, so we are at Narcan. what, 10 slides in? We talk about it now?
Something like that.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's okay. We were going to get there anyway.
Exactly. All right, so what Narcan is. So again, Narcan is a medication that temporarily reverses overdoses. It removes the opioids from the receptors, and it typically removes them from the receptors for about 30 to 90 minutes. This is important to know because you can Narcan someone can get Narcan, have those opiates removed, but then after the Narcan naturally degrades, if there's still enough opiates there, you can overdose again. So that's a big danger and something that we really want to stress. Again, kind of emphasizes the need for EMS and to have sufficient Narcan. Like any medication, it's temperature sensitive and there's a shelf life. So again, we want to keep it in normal temperatures, so 59 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and typically 2 years. So the caveat on this is that if Narcan is 3 years out, or if you leave it in your car, it's not all of a sudden going to become dangerous. It's just the medication will lose some of its efficacy, which, again, not great, but it still has the potential to save individuals' lives. It's not going to make it dangerous. You might just need more. And the last big point before I turn it back over to Ben is that Narcan is harmless. Again, Narcan is just this medication that removes opiates from its receptors. So it can be given to children, pregnant individuals, pets. And if you were to give Narcan to someone who is maybe just passed out from alcohol, that would not hurt that individual. So you can't hurt someone by giving Narcan. And that's, I think, a really big misconception. And I think that's a barrier for folks to give Narcan because they don't want to hurt someone. You can't hurt someone by giving Narcan.
So, you know, why would we ever think to use it? Okay, so there's a lot of things. So I'll start with our risk factors, which I've kind of touched on a little bit. So for individuals, you know, who have a low tolerance, who are not, you know, regularly using opioids, you know, really kind of even the smallest bit of fentanyl can really kind of throw them for a loop, and that can be at risk of an overdose. So someone, you know, I always thought about this, you know, for quite some time. You know, I used to do groups in rehab facilities, and we would do sexual health education and stuff like that. But, you know, we talk about our syringe exchange program very briefly, but like you always talk to these individuals in the setting, and like I always worried about, you know, if there was anything I said that, like, you know, what would happen once those individuals leave that controlled setting, right? And so we're talking about that. So if there's someone who, you know, has, you know, been at a substance rehabilitation facility for, you know, 28 days, it could even be 14 or longer than that. Once that starts to happen, their tolerance goes right back down. Okay, so if they go back out and they engage in use, and they engage in the same amount of use or use the same amount as before they came in, they can be at a really elevated risk of experiencing an overdose. Using drugs alone is another huge risk factor, and this is a risk factor because you know, a lot of times, so there, you know, the way I like to see, you know, say this is like people, I've heard plenty of times that people have tried to use Narcan on themselves. Okay. And so like, while there is the physical capability of, we'll show you the package in a second, but like it's a nasal spray. So you just press it and put it up your nose and press in the plunger. People have done that before. I've heard people do it. But chances are, in those moments where people have used it, chances are they probably weren't experiencing an overdose. Okay, so typically when those overdoses happen, and they happen really quickly, a lot of times you're not going to have that ability to do it. So using drugs alone is going to be a risk factor. You know, a lot of more times than not, so you're not going to be able to use it on yourself. So it's always better to use with someone nearby or someone you trust, you know, or around people. And so that's really important to know. Mixing drugs and unknown product is something that we talked about already. You know, if there's any kind of fentanyl in any product that any people are purchasing or getting off the street, it could be mixed in there. You don't exactly know what it is. If you're not testing the product, you may not know. Any kind of serious illness, so we're talking about respiratory depression, any kind of chronic underlying condition that people may or may not know that they have, can affect the body's ability to recover itself while it's trying to reverse that overdose, aided by the Narcan, obviously. In previous overdose there too is a risk factor too, because we know that, William talked about overdose aftercare counseling for the individual who's experiencing the overdose at some point. Previous overdoses, any kind of overdose is a traumatic experience, okay? It's a traumatic experience for someone who is living that overdose, who's experiencing it. It can also be for the individual who's responding. Those previous overdoses can, cause those physical traumas to the brain, to the body. They can also cause those mental, emotional traumas to individuals. And that's something that we really, when we work with individuals who may be using, we talk to them about that. And those were the heavy parts. Those were the heavy parts of the conversations was, what got me here, maybe in a rehabilitation facility was the experience of the overdose. That was, that's the hard part to kind of sift through and shake up, okay, with people. And at that point, you take a step back, you listen, and then you respond when it's, when they want you to, and you provide, your 2 cents, and you just let them know, like, okay, so if you feel like you're going to use again, you can test your product. Don't use alone. Those things really do, they don't eliminate risk, but they do reduce it. Okay. That's the premise here. But like William said, so it's harmless. And so I remember 5 years ago when I was trained. So I've been really on the substance side for 4 years, but with the agency altogether for 5. I remember being trained on Narcan. I was trained on Narcan with the injection kind. And so what that training was like was we would pass around an orange, and we would have to draw the stuff out of the vial and with the syringe, and you have to stick it in the orange to simulate it like that, simulate going in the muscle. And I remember thinking, I'm not smart enough to do that. There's no way in a high pressure situation and responding to an overdose that I am ever going to be able to pull that apart. Okay. Fortunately, I've been at a place where people have known how to do it and have been able to, experience those overdoses as a responder, not as an administrator. But with the nasal spray, it's much, much, much easier. So how can we tell if someone is experiencing an overdose? We're looking for heavy, uncontrollable nods. There's a nod that's associated with heroin use, so not all nods are overdoses. That's important to know. Any kind of unresponsiveness, slow, shallow, no breathing. Okay, that's something that we really do want to look for. Any kind of change in skin tone. Okay, so whatever someone's facial complexion might be, it could change. It could be lighter, drawn out, blue, gray, bluing of the lips and the fingernail beds. Those are some really telltale signs right there that someone is struggling to breathe. They may be experiencing an overdose in those moments. Any kind of unusual snoring, gurgling, a choke. I heard this phrase is coined as death rattle. Sometimes it's a really loud, violent choke. Anybody with a limp body who can't be woken up, eyes rolling back into the head, if, in the moment of that experiencing, and so a lot of times one that's not on there is any kind of paraphernalia, any kind of stuff that may be around the scene that may tip somebody off to say, okay, that might be, this person might be engaging in substance use or might have engaged in that. If you see a syringe, if you see any kind of product around, that also might be a specific sign to this.
Yeah. So what to do? So what to do if you encounter someone who has that gurgling breath or maybe unconscious, and then you do suspect an overdose. The first step is to try to elicit a response. So try to see they're responsive, see if they're okay, go from there. One really good way that we teach people how to do it, it's called a sternal rub. So you ball your hand up into a fist, and you go right here on like the sternal plate right here, and you rub up and down. And as I'm doing it, it's an uncomfortable feeling. And that's on purpose. It's uncomfortable, not going to hurt the individual. And if an individual does not wake up from that, a little sore, then, we want to start the process to administer Narcan. So an individual does not wake up, again, suspecting overdose. We're going to start either first by calling 911. A really great way to do that is if you take out your phone, you put 911 on speaker, And then while you're talking to the operator, go ahead and administer Narcan if you're going to call 911. If you have Narcan closer or you're not necessarily planning on calling 911, you're going to get your nice overdose kit right here. For anyone participating in the area, stop by, grab a Narcan kit if you're interested. But you're going to grab your kit. You're going to get your Narcan, which looks like this. You're going to peel back right here just to open up the medication. And you're just going to stick it directly in the individual's nose. You don't have to take off the cap. You don't have to do anything. Just stick it right in and press the plunger all the way. And that will administer a full dose. After you administer, you're going to take a step back. You're going to observe. Did the Narcan have an effect? Does he have a change in breathing? Is he active? Is he responsive? If not, after you waited kind of 30 seconds, just a moment to see if a change is going to happen. In these kits are a one-way rescue breathing face shield. The way this works is air can only go one way, and it can only go from your mouth into the individual's body. So you can perform rescue breathing. And again, with this rescue breathing, since it's a respiratory depression, it's the individual's lungs are not working. So those are the problem area. So it's the air getting in and out of the body. So we're not necessarily as worried about giving CPR directly to the heart, because the heart should still be beating, still be functioning. Again, we're worried about the air and the oxygen to the rest of the body. So give breaths. So 2 quick breaths in, and then 1 breath every 5 seconds after that. Ideally, that's 1 minute and 30 seconds. In this situation, it's going to be very complex. It's going to be, I'm sure, a lot of emotions. And so, again, we're not expecting folks to keep a timer and do it to the direct minute. So after about 1 minute and 30 seconds, and the 30 seconds observing, it should put you about 2 minutes out. If you have another Narcan, go ahead and administer it into the other nostril. Again, just in the nose, press the plunger, and see if that makes a difference for the individual. Hopefully an individual will be able to respond. And I don't know if folks have seen videos or heard stories about it, but you can go from a full slump, unconscious, unresponsive to and back into the world. And so it can be that sudden, or it could be a more gradual wake up, but you'll be able to tell. And so, and again, sometimes 1 Narcan will do it. Sometimes it will be 2. Sometimes it might be 3 or 4. It depends on the amount of opioids in the receptor. And so keep giving Narcan to an individual until a response happens or you run out of Narcan. If for some reason you need to leave the room, maybe say to guide EMS in or to bring another person in to help you, go ahead and put them in the recovery position. And that's essentially so the individual is on their side in case they have to vomit. That way the vomit can exit their body and does not stay in the body and choke the individual, or the individual would develop pneumonia. So that. And so after an overdose, so if the Narcan works and the individual is now responsive, likely they're going to be very confused and probably very agitated, because what the Narcan did is, again, it removed the opiates from the receptors. And that can put an individual into an experience of experiencing withdrawal, which can be very painful and stressful and very agitating. So again, just calmly and just as coolly as possible to say, hey, I found you, I was with you, I thought you were overdosing, I provided Narcan. Let's go from here. If EMS arrives, again, just let them know how much Narcan you gave, when you found the individual, and any other facts that could help EMS out in the situation. And then Ben will touch upon this next form in a second, but it's, again, a really good tool to track where overdoses are and to monitor to see if there's something very dangerous in the community.
Yep. And so one of the things that we have, and we typically try to throw these in the blue kits too, so that if you're using the kit, we also, and we have the instructions here, and also the copy of that Narcan use reporting form. It should be in there. So it looks just like that. It's right on your screen. If it was used, complete it, return it to us for any kind of replacement Narcan kit. So basically, we're not trying to figure out anybody's first, last name, social address. Not worried about that. But like typically these are used because we can report the reversals of the state DOH, and we can, figure out and compile what areas are the overdoses occurring in. I touched on New York State being this big wide open area, right? So we're looking at, we're looking at zip codes, 13204, or we're looking at 13213, or wherever it might be, where, oh, okay, there we got, eight reversal forms from this zip code. And that might point us or other agencies in the direction of where to go for outreach. And it also keeps us, gives us kind of a tip on where these overdoses may be occurring more frequently. It's not about the individual. Well, I mean, it's about the individual, but we're not trying to figure out the individual's life story with this. It's more about how can we get into the community, where can we perform these outreach events and tactics so that we can continue to get Narcan out to these places and into people's hands. Following this, New York State has the Good Samaritan law, which covers, it protects people who are experiencing the overdose. It also protects the individual who is trying to reverse the overdose. Okay. On the screen, it tells you what it doesn't protect you from and what it does protect you from, as far as this. And so I think that this is definitely a different subject here and can be, pretty loaded at times. One of the big caveats to overdose fatalities, a lot of times they occur when 911 is not called. Okay. And so, we encourage people to call 911 and EMS, but we know that this doesn't happen all the time. So how do we reverse the overdose if 911 is not called? We get Narcan out into the hands, but we want to encourage people to let them know that you can use Narcan on somebody who's overdosing, and it will protect you in the event that that overdose does become fatal. Okay. Studies have found those witnessing overdoses a lot, they don't call for the fear of criminal prosecution for drug possession. And this is so important. We kind of talked about this today, and I'll never forget, pre-COVID, I was going into the Justice Center in Onondaga County, and I would give these Narcan trainings to individuals. And I'll never forget that someone stood up right in the back. They stood right up and they go, "Hey, that's cool and all, but I'm not calling 911. It's not happening." Okay. There's, and I'm not going to be up there and ask him why in front of a crowd. Okay. We're not going to do that. But this person came up to me at the end and was like, "Here's why I'm not going to do this." And so I said, "Well, listen, I can't take away those experiences that you may have had with emergency responders. I don't have that. I don't have that power. I can't heal that pain. But I can't, what I did talk about was, well, would you consider taking a kit and having it on you so that you could perform the overdose the reversal technique?" And he said, he goes, "I would definitely think about it." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "If I get out, or when I get out, can I come by and pick one up?" Absolutely. No questions asked. If you're in the area with that, train real quick, like they were trained in there, just give them a little the blue card, the CERT card, which, I'll talk about in a second. With that, pick it up. But by the same token, someone else came up to me at the end right after that, and they said, "Well, I didn't know the Good Samaritan law existed. I didn't know that was a thing. So now the next time I will call 911. So we're just trying to work with experiences. We're just trying to work with people. If you're not going to call, well, you take Narcan so that you can respond. If not, okay, you can always call somebody else. You can always, I've heard people who have called 911 and they've left the scene. They've said, "Hey, it's right here," or "He or she's right here," this and that. People come, they're not there. Someone responds to the overdose. Okay. And that's important too. Last thing I'll touch on. So I talked about this blue card. This is the CERT card that we will give out and we'll be sending to you all upon completion of this. I can't thank you enough for being here, by the way. NCAP is the naloxone co-payment assistance program, which means that you could take that blue card to any pharmacy. For us, we have the link www.health.ny.gov/overdose. And it is literally a directory, a statewide directory of the participating pharmacies that if you bring that blue card to the pharmacy, they will provide you with the Narcan. Okay, they'll give it, they probably won't give it to you in these blue bags. They'll probably give it to you in a box. That's okay. As long as you're getting it and as long as you have the medication, that will be good for you to take. I have never heard of anybody paying a copay to pick up a Narcan kit. And it's been fairly easy, but at the same time, you all are here taking this training with us. We very much appreciate you. So I can't thank you enough again for joining in. And I'm sure William feels the same way, but at the same time, you've taken it with us. You can call or email us and we can get that to you. If you're not near the area, you can always send us an email here, give us a ring. We can mail it to you. Okay, it's pretty easy. As long as I have it, we'll get it out to you pretty quickly. And a lot of times we're ordering and ordering and ordering. So as long as we've got it, then we will go for that. And so with that, I think that will conclude our slideshow here. William, anything I left out?
No, again, we really appreciate you being here. I mean, this is something obviously that we're very passionate about. We've seen people, I think, go through substance use and have it affect people's lives. And we're not only here trying to provide resources and education, we're also trying to break down stigma surrounding this. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we're all people. We're all trying to figure out, live our best lives and all that. So, yeah, thank you so much for participating. Please, if you have any questions, please let us know. I know
we have a few. Yeah, we have a few questions.
I see that orange bar lighting up.
Yeah. Ready? Are you ready for this?
Go ahead.
Here's the first question. Since Narcan runs out 30 to 90 minutes after being given, what do folks need afterwards to be okay? Like what post-care should they have? For example, the follow-up is, what would they get? How would they be treated if they did go to the hospital?
So they would be treated, they would monitor their symptoms. So a lot of times in that, precipitated withdrawal, people can be really shaky. They can feel dehydrated, dry mouth, and like really sick, nauseous, vomiting. So in those areas, people in the emergency departments can address all those needs there and kind of help comfort them through those moments. So there's like a lot of different things that they can provide for those specific symptoms. But a lot of times, I will tell you that one of the harder things I've ever had to watch in my career was someone who is recovering through a withdrawal. For the people who are in like the detox wings of the rehabs, incredibly tough. Okay, because people are uncomfortable. Okay, and sometimes it's hard to alleviate that nausea. It's hard to alleviate that dehydration. It's hard to alleviate those shakes, and they'll be monitored. They'll be, given any kind of fluids that they may need to be, any kind of medication to help, with specific symptoms that might be happening in there. But what they'll do is they'll try and address those specific symptoms, in whatever fashion they can, obviously, to what they can provide at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add on to that too, an overdose is a very traumatic experience. And so there very likely could be another underlying illness or condition going on that cannot be taken care of at home or wherever an individual is. So it's important if, say, an overdose caused a heart attack or an additional trauma, that an individual would need to be at a hospital to receive the proper care. Great.
Another question that we have is, where are we in terms of overdoses as opposed to 4 years ago? And I would just tack on in Onondaga County or in any of the counties that you're familiar with then.
I'll address Onondaga County because I know the specifics of that a little bit better than like say Oneida or Oswego. So a couple of years ago, I think 2018, I believe, was the high of overdoses. I believe it was in the it was 150s or 160s. That's a lot. Okay, so if you're going by days, that's a fatality every other day, or almost every other day. It started to go down. We had those numbers declining in 2019. It wasn't great per se. I mean, for me, I'm utopic, so I would say that any number greater than one is tough. But we did decrease that number. People decreased that number. But in 2020, we were just short of 200 overdoses for the year, and that's a lot. I mean, that was. I know the difference between 2018 and 2020 was at least like 34 to 35. I couldn't give you the specific numbers. I know it's somewhere in that 150, 160 range to the top 190s. That's hard. And a lot of that had to do, with when coronavirus came, people lost connection again. Okay. So, substance use can be very isolating in itself. People do not always feel comfortable talking about it. Okay. And it can be hard for someone who's engaging in regular use to reach out for help because of, like William said, because of stigma, because how they fear they may be treated. And those things still happen. It's very, it takes a lot for someone to ask for help in those ways, especially if they can recognize that, hey, I want to do something about this. I want to change this. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to have this risk anymore. When people were, and there was nothing really that anybody could do, but changing to, telehealth is great in a lot of ways, but people did lose their connection, that face-to-face interaction with people. And I think that really isolated and drove that stuff out in people. And I think that really attributed to the rise in overdose in 2020. We hope that we can just, that's really what we've always tried to provide here is that, when people are here in front of us, how can we provide them the best possible care? And if they don't want the care today, hopefully we've left a good enough impression that they feel comfortable enough to come back to us when they do want that. And that's so, so, so important. And it's a very, I don't know if it's underlooked, but I think that in a lot of places, we could probably do better with that.
So you go into a lot of organizations, whether they're companies or just groups of individuals. What is the response? What are people's response to learning more about the realities of the opioid epidemic and this idea of having Narcan in their cars or their purses, scanning the community for opportunities to save a life? I mean, I can't believe that everybody is receptive to being something within their experience. And does that create kind of this other divide from what, how people receive the training?
That is, I love that question. That's so good. And I love it for a lot of reasons. So when I transitioned into this role and I was starting to do community Narcan trainings, I did it for a small business right down the road. And they were so, they asked me for an hour and I was there for 2. And we did the training for about, 50, 55 minutes. And we talked, and I'll never forget the head guy there was like, what the heck, Ben? He goes, you kept us, we lost lunch. And I'm like, hey, you were the one asking. It was fun. It was great. He was kidding. They could do whatever they want. And obviously they did that. That was a really positive experience. And I would say that most of my experience in training people in the community has been mostly that. I remember doing another business, a room about 45 to 50 individuals, which probably was my first big one for that. I was a little nervous for that, but as soon as you could probably tell that I like to talk. So when people let me talk, it was great. And I kind of rolled with it for about 45, 50 minutes. And so a lot of people in their eye contact there, seemed like most people through their nonverbals were very, very engaged. Were they talkative? not so much. But like when you get that kind of feedback coming back, you know, a week later, 2 weeks later, or hey, they give you a call, hey, I was at your training, I just never got around to getting the kit from you. You know, that's the kind of stuff we like to see. I wouldn't say that happens 100% of the time. There have definitely been, and I have not faced a hostile crowd, but I have faced people who have asked me questions that, you know, their experience is a little bit different, right? And they, you know, but you can tell that, like, you know, some of these harm reduction concepts are they're not easy for everybody to accept from the jump. And I understand that. And that's why I don't try and ever tell anybody how to think. But I can provide them with that information, and they take my information. And honestly, like when they do ask me those pointed questions, I actually think that we're making some progress in those ways. It's a lot of fun for me. I enjoy that challenge and that task. It's great. It's really good. It's really fun. You know, not everybody agrees. Okay. But do they stay? Are they hearing? And they have the information, and I can only hope to empower them in order to come grab a kit, be a responder, do what you have to.
Ben, I've got a quick question. So when I first learned how to, from Steve Wood, how to put the Narcan kit together, it was not the injection one, but it was the nasal that you had to piece together. And I'm like,
yeah,
how am I going to do this? Being nervous. I mean, there were so many parts, right? So we learned anyway, but I thought, oh my gosh, I'll throw one in my car. And he's like, no, because the heat and the cold and the whole thing. So do you just remind everybody that the fluctuations in the heat and cold, fabulous weather that we have here in Central New York is maybe how it affects the medication?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would never say anything bad about the weather here in Syracuse. I'm happy to experience.
I didn't say that.
For me, no.
I will. I don't like it.
You
I don't
can.
like it. It's not.
It was 75 out. I wore a sweater and a shirt underneath it. I like the heat. More the better. But good question. So the thing is that you know, we encourage people to keep it in a, you know, climate controlled setting. I believe it's between 59 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So like leaving it in your car, you know, maybe for a day is not the worst thing in the world. However, like when you get those fluctuations, you know, like William said earlier, like the efficacy can kind of change. So, okay, so how potent that could be, it won't make it toxic and it won't make it harmful. And that's the good part about it, but it'll just, you know, kind of lessen the chances that it will work to its fullest capacity. You know, one strategy for me has always been this. I do a lot of traveling in the summers. Most weekends I'm gone. You know, I get out and I coach. I'm out there. I'm out in the heat. I am out in there. So, I mean, I keep these in my book bag and I try and find the coolest place there to kind of have it. And so it really kind of stays, and usually, like, I know this is a little, like, it's not a cooler or anything, but I do keep cool waters in there and I kind of keep it around there so that it is kind of in that environment, you know, that's not out of those ranges. You can't be perfect with that, but I always bring them. And it's not that I ever think that I'm going to use them, but there's always the chance that you can't, right? So I feel like, you know, sometimes when we least expect we can face these things, sometimes they actually happen. So I haven't gone unprepared in about, you know, 3 years about bringing those around. I just try and keep them there, and I'm in my bag a lot, so I always check and see like how cool it is in there, and it's really kind of eyeballing it and kind of going on feel there. But you know, I think that's a pretty. I always try and keep it in a place, like if it's in a work bag, I always try and make sure it's just in there and not in my glove compartment, and that's something that I really just try to be conscious of. And really that's kind
Ben, as you said during the presentation, any Narcan is better than no Narcan.
Yep.
And with that, our time is up, and I want to thank you hugely for just saying all of those words in such a remarkable and easily understandable way for us to better understand everybody's situation and what we can do to help. So anybody who's interested, everyone on this call, we will reach out to get you the Narcan kit and also to send the blue cards out. Huge thank you to Ben and to William. Thank you so much, Fran, our Deputy Director, for joining us tonight. I want to invite all of you to tomorrow's event, same channel, same time. We'll be here right here at 7 o'clock. And we're going to hear from Michelle Horton, who has her own business called Always Chasing Better. She'll be talking to us about how to discover our best selves and how to actually do something about it. So please join us. We put some links in the chat if you need to grab those so you can open them at a later time. We really appreciate all of your help on behalf of ACR Health, Kinney Drugs Foundation, and Noble Health Services. Thank you so, so much for joining us tonight. Take care and be well.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great night.